My spoiled sister was always a star, private school, luxury trips, and a new car at 18. At our grandma's birthday dinner, she found out I quietly bought a penthouse in NYC, and she lost her mind. She screamed. My dad dropped his fork, and my aunt said something that made everyone freeze. 31, male own a highly successful boutique cybersecurity firm that contracts directly with mid-sized financial institutions. But if you were to ask my immediate family, they would confidently tell you I am just a glorified IT guy who resets passwords and fixes frozen screens for a living. I never bothered to correct them. Growing up in my house, there was absolutely no room for me to be anything successful or ambitious because the spotlight was permanently, blindingly fixed on my younger sister. My sister is 28, and from the literal day she was born, she was treated like she was next in line for a royal throne. My parents operated on a system of massive, undeniable favoritism. I went to the overcrowded local public school, wore my older cousin's faded hand-me-downs, and had to start working at a local hardware store the second I turned 15 just to have a few dollars in my pocket. My sister, on the other hand, was sent to an exclusive, ridiculously expensive private academy. She went on fully funded, month-long summer trips to Europe with her friends while I was stocking shelves. On the morning of her 18th birthday, I walked out the driveway and saw a giant red velvet bow attached to the hood of a brand-new, fully loaded luxury SUV. When I made the mistake of asking my father how they could possibly afford a car like that, he pulled me aside, gave me a stern lecture about how my sister needed a safe, reliable vehicle that matched her social image, and told me I needed to stop counting other people's money. So I did exactly that. I stopped looking at their money, and I put my head down and started building my own. I moved out the week I turned 18. I took out student loans, lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, survived on generic instant noodles, and spent every waking hour teaching myself advanced coding, penetration testing, and network security. By the time I was 25, I had launched my own company. I worked 90-hour weeks, sleeping under my desk most nights. I built a solid client roster through sheer grit. As the money started rolling in, I lived well below my means, quietly invested my profits into index funds and real estate. I never breathed a single word to my family about my financial success because I knew exactly how that movie would end. The second they knew I had capital, I would instantly transform from the invisible, disappointing son into the family ATM. My sister eventually graduated with a vague communications degree and immediately declared to the world that she was a lifestyle influencer. She rented a gorgeous, massive luxury loft right downtown, wore clothes that cost more than my entire college tuition, and constantly posted heavily filtered photos of expensive dinners in VIP club sections. My parents praised her hustle relentlessly. My mother actually carried a little binder of her Instagram screenshots in her purse to show off to the cashiers at the grocery store. That entire grand illusion completely shattered at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. My aunt, my father's older sister, had organized a dinner at a highly exclusive, ridiculously overpriced French restaurant in the city. My aunt is a retired corporate auditor. She is sharp. She misses absolutely nothing, and she has always treated me with a quiet, respectful distance. There were about 12 of us sitting at a long private table in the back. My sister arrived 30 minutes late, wearing a designer dress that practically screamed for attention, loudly complaining to the entire table about the traffic and how incredibly cramped her luxury loft was getting. She dramatically waved her wine glass around and sighed. She loudly announced that she just needed more space, that her walk-in closet was tiny, and that she had already told our dad she needed to upgrade to a better building next month, specifically demanding something with a real 24-hour concierge. I glanced at my father. He looked terrible. He was pale, almost sick-looking, and he was visibly sweating right through the collar of his dress shirt. He nervously pushed his food around and mumbled something under his breath about looking into it. I was sitting directly across from my aunt. We had been having a quiet, incredibly boring conversation about the changing state tax codes. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water, looked right at me, and casually mentioned that she remembered my apartment lease was up soon. She asked if I was planning on renewing. I shook my head, cutting a piece of my steak. I kept my voice low and conversational. I told her that I actually didn't renew the lease because I had closed on a new place the previous week, and I was planning on moving my servers and furniture in over the weekend. My aunt raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. She asked what neighborhood I bought in. I casually told her I bought in Tribeca. I mentioned it was a penthouse, admitting it needed a little cosmetic updating, but that the square footage was great and the building's private security was exactly what I needed to protect my work equipment. The entire table went completely, uncomfortably dead. My sister had been right in the middle of a loud, self-centered story about her follower count. She stopped mid-word. Her head snapped toward me so fast, I honestly thought she might injure her neck. Her voice pierced right through the ambient, polite noise of the busy restaurant. She demanded to know what I had just said. I didn't break eye contact with my aunt. I just repeated the word penthouse. My father dropped his heavy silver fork. It hit the edge of his fine china plate with a loud, ringing clatter that echoed across our entire section of the dining room. My sister's face turned a deep, blotchy red. She practically yelled across the table, asking if I was seriously claiming to have bought a penthouse in Tribeca. She told me it was impossible, that I fixed computers for a living, and that I lived in a shoebox. She accused me of lying right to Grandma's face just to look good in front of the family. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, opened my secure file drive, pulled up the digital copy of the recorded deed, and slid the phone across the white tablecloth to her. She snatched the phone up like a hawk. I sat back and watched her eyes dart frantically back and forth across the screen. I watched her process the luxury building address, the massive purchase price, and my name listed clearly as the sole, independent owner of the property. She completely lost her mind. She slammed my phone down on the table, so hard the crystal water glasses physically shook. She screamed that it was a joke. She demanded to know how I could possibly afford a multi-million-dollar property. She started pointing frantically at me, yelling to the whole room that I was hiding money, that I had been hiding wealth from the family this entire time, while she was supposedly stuck suffering in a tiny apartment. She stood up from her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. People at the surrounding tables stopped eating and started staring at us. My mother panicked and tried to grab her arm to pull her back down, but my sister violently shoved her hand away. She screamed that it wasn't fair. Her voice cracked with this pure, unadulterated, toxic entitlement. She looked right at our dad, pointing at my phone, and demanded that he force me to let her move into the penthouse. She yelled that I didn't need that much space because I didn't even have a real social life, and that she desperately needed that kind of high-end backdrop for her influencer brand. My aunt placed her linen napkin deliberately on the table. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the heavy, crushing density of lead. She told my sister to sit down. My sister glared at her, completely out of her mind with jealousy, and snapped back, asking what she had just said. My aunt looked her dead in the eye. She told my sister to sit down and shut her mouth. She stated, in a voice cold enough to freeze water, that my sister had absolutely no right to scream at me for working hard and building a life, especially when my sister was standing there wearing stolen money. The entire table froze. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. My father jumped up from his chair immediately, his hands visibly trembling. He begged his sister to stop, pleading with her not to do this here. My aunt completely ignored him. She kept her eyes locked entirely on my sister. She asked my sister if she wanted to know why our father looked like he hadn't slept a full night in over a year. My aunt revealed that 2 weeks ago, acting as Grandma's legal and financial power of attorney, she had ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of Grandma's entire estate. She then dropped the hammer. She announced at the table that our father had secretly taken out a massive, illegal second mortgage on Grandma's paid-off house. He had completely drained her primary retirement annuity. He had been systematically, quietly siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for my sister's luxury loft, her expensive car, and her lavish trips. My sister's jaw actually dropped. She looked over at our father. He couldn't even meet her eyes. He just collapsed back into his chair, put his elbows on the table, and buried his face in his shaking hands. My aunt looked at my sister without a single ounce of pity. She told my sister that she was broke. She told her that our father was broke. And she finished by stating clearly that if our father did not sign the deed to Grandma's house completely over to my aunt's legal control by Monday morning, she was going to the police to have him arrested and federally charged for severe elder financial abuse. My mother instantly burst into hysterical tears. My sister grabbed her expensive designer purse, knocked her chair over backward, and literally ran out of the restaurant in tears. I just sat there in the quiet, awkward aftermath, picked up my knife, and calmly finished my steak. I felt absolutely no shock. It honestly made perfect sense. The math of their lavish lifestyle had never, ever added up. Now the bill was finally due. I genuinely thought that disastrous dinner would be the end of the drama. I assumed they would retreat into their profound shame, downsize their lives, and try to quietly rebuild whatever they could. I drastically, foolishly underestimated the sheer, blinding entitlement of a family that had spent 3 decades living inside a narcissistic delusion. About 3 weeks later, I was standing in the massive empty living room of my new penthouse, meeting with a high-end general contractor about pulling permits to install custom, climate-controlled server racks in the spare room. My phone buzzed. It was the building's front desk concierge. He told me a process server was waiting in the lobby and was legally required to hand a document directly to me. I took the elevator down to the marble lobby and accepted a thick, heavy manila envelope from a tired-looking guy in a windbreaker. I ripped it open as the elevator took me back up. It was a massive civil lawsuit formally filed in the New York State Supreme Court. The listed plaintiffs were my father and my sister. They were officially suing me for breach of contract, unjust enrichment, and corporate fraud. I flipped to the back of the dense legal complaint, and there it was, attached as exhibit. It was a photocopy of a typed, highly formal promissory note. The note claimed that exactly 7 years ago, my father had generously provided me with $800,000 in cash as seed capital to launch my cybersecurity firm. In exchange for this massive investment, the note clearly stated that my father and my sister were legally entitled to 50% of all future corporate profits and a full 50% equity stake in any physical assets purchased by the company or its subsidiaries. At the very bottom of the page, in dark ink, was my signature. But that wasn't the worst part. Included with the complaint was a formal notice of Elise Pendens, a severe legal hold, that their lawyer had successfully filed against a deed to my penthouse with the county clerk. Because they were claiming my company bought the property using their stolen equity, they were legally allowed to tie up the title pending the outcome of the lawsuit. I couldn't sell the property. I couldn't borrow a dime against it. And my contractor took one look at the paperwork and immediately informed me that the building's strict HOA would absolutely not approve my renovation permits while the title was actively under major civil litigation. They had effectively frozen my entire life. I didn't call my father to scream at him. I didn't send my sister an angry, emotional text message. I walked calmly into my home office, opened my laptop, and spent 2 hours researching the most ruthless, aggressive, bloodthirsty corporate litigation firms in Manhattan. I found a guy with a reputation for completely destroying people in court. I called his office and booked an emergency consultation for the very next morning. I walked into a stunning office overlooking the city and sat across a massive glass conference table from a senior partner named Vance. Vance had perfectly parted silver hair, a custom suit, and the cold, unblinking, terrifying stare of a great white shark. I slid the thick legal complaint and the photocopy of the forged note across the glass to him. I looked him dead in the eyes and told him I did not sign that paper. I explained that my father never gave me a single dime, that he didn't have $800,000 7 years ago, and he certainly didn't have it now. I told Vance that my sister almost certainly traced my signature from an old birthday card, or maybe a college loan co-signed document my parents had kept in their filing cabinet. Vance reviewed the paperwork in total silence, turning the pages slowly. He finally looked up. He explained that Elise Pendens is a very standard, incredibly dirty extortion tactic used in high-stakes real estate disputes. He said they tie up your most valuable asset, knowing that the New York civil legal process takes a year or more to play out, hoping you will panic and settle out of court for a massive lump sum just to make them go away and get your life back. I kept my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. I told Vance I was not settling for a single penny. I told him I wanted to absolutely destroy them. I wanted this litigated to the absolute bitter end. and I wanted every single dirty, illegal trick they were pulling dragged out into the blinding light of courtroom. Vance smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant, predatory smile. He leaned forward and said that was excellent. He explained that we wouldn't just file a standard motion to dismiss. Instead, we would file a massive, aggressive counterclaim. We would force them deep into the discovery phase. He laid out the strategy perfectly. If they want to legally claim, they handed me nearly $1 million in cash. The absolute burden of proof is on them to show the distinct paper trail of that money. Vance promised we would aggressively subpoena every single bank account, every tax return, and every corporate ledger my father had touched for the last decade. The war officially began. The legal timeline in New York civil litigation is intentionally, agonizingly slow. It is designed to grind you down financially and emotionally. For the first 2 solid months, my sister was absolutely relentless. She clearly, stupidly believed I would eventually cave under the massive pressure. She actually started showing up at my luxury building, demanding the concierge let her up to the penthouse, screaming in the lobby that she was a legal part owner of the property. I had to have Vance file a formal trespass notice with the building security team and the local precinct. She resorted to sending me unhinged emails from burner addresses, wildly oscillating between demanding I pay them $5 million immediately to drop the suit and crying hysterically about how she was going to be violently evicted from her beautiful loft because Dad's money had suddenly dried up. I didn't reply to a single word. I forwarded every single communication, every voicemail, and every email directly to Vance's paralegal to build a harassment case. About 6 months into the brutal litigation, the discovery phase fully opened. Vance did exactly what he promised. We served massive, sweeping, unavoidable subpoenas on my father's business. He owned a medium-sized logistics and shipping company that he ran with a silent partner. We legally demanded all corporate financial records, all wire transfer logs, and all state and federal tax filings specifically targeting the exact year and month they claimed to have generously given me the seed money. Their cheap, strip mall lawyer fought the subpoenas aggressively, filing motions claiming the business records were entirely irrelevant to a personal family loan. We dragged them into a hearing in front of a heavily overworked judge. Vance stood up and expertly, coldly argued that if the plaintiff is legally claiming to have disbursed nearly $1 million in liquid capital, the defense has an absolute, undeniable right to verify the physical origin of those funds to ensure it wasn't the product of money laundering. The judge completely agreed with Vance. He slammed his gavel and ordered my father to produce the unredacted documents within 30 days or face severe contempt of court charges. As part of discovery, Vance also filed a motion compelling them to surrender the absolute original, physical copy of the promissory note to our office, arguing that a photocopy was insufficient evidence for a claim of this magnitude. When the heavy banker boxes full of financial records and the original note finally arrived at Vance's office, we didn't waste time. We hired a ruthless, highly expensive forensic accountant, and Vance sent the original note to a specialized forensic document examiner. It took the accountant 3 weeks to fully unravel the chaotic mess of my father's books. I sat in Vance's office, drinking a coffee, looking at the accountant's final, bound report. What she found was infinitely worse than I had ever anticipated. My father hadn't just stolen from my grandmother's retirement. He had been running an incredibly elaborate, desperate, and highly illegal embezzlement scheme deep within his own logistics company. He had a wealthy, silent business partner who funded the operations while my father handled the day-to-day management and the books. The forensic accountant found that my father had been systematically double-billing their biggest clients, creating totally fake vendor invoices for services that didn't exist, and quietly routing hundreds of thousands of dollars into a hidden offshore shell company registered in the Caribbean. From that offshore shell company, the money trickled back into the States directly into my sister's personal checking accounts to fund her influencer lifestyle. He was literally stealing from his own company, defrauding a business partner, and committing federal tax evasion to fund his golden child's delusion. And when that still wasn't enough to keep up with her spending, he stole from his own elderly mother. But the absolute best part, the nail in the coffin, was the timeline. The accountant proved that on the exact date the forged promissory note claimed, he handed me $800,000. His primary corporate operating accounts were deeply overdrawn. The money literally never existed. Vance tapped the thick report with his expensive pen. He stated that this was textbook federal wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and severe tax evasion. He warned me that if we presented this evidence at a public trial, the judge would be legally, ethically obligated to instantly notify the federal authorities. I looked at Vance and told him we weren't waiting for a trial. I told him we were going to drop the bomb at the deposition. A deposition is where civil cases are truly, brutally won or lost. You are placed under oath in a sterile conference room, facing the opposing counsel and a court reporter. If you lie, it is immediate documented perjury. 2 weeks later, we walked into a neutral arbitration office downtown. My father looked like he had aged 10 years and 6 months. He was gaunt. His cheap suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and he absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. My sister, however, walked into that room wearing a pristine, bright white designer blazer, carrying a bag she had bought with stolen money, looking incredibly smug and confident. She honestly thought she was winning. She genuinely believed the legal system was just another annoying thing she could easily bully, lie, and cry her way through. They sat on one side of the long, heavy wooden table with their exhausted, confused-looking attorney. Vance and I sat on the other side. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers hovering expertly over her steno machine. Vance started the deposition with my sister. He questioned her relentlessly for 2 solid hours, giving her enough rope to hang herself twice. He let her spin a massive, incredibly complicated web of obvious lies under penalty of perjury. She confidently, arrogantly testified that she was physically present in the room when my father handed me a cashier's check for $800,000. She described the room in detail. She described the weather that day. She committed severe perjury with the practiced, chilling ease of a lifelong, sociopathic manipulator. When she finally finished her story, Vance didn't blink. He just reached into his briefcase and pulled out the forensic accounting report. He slid a thick stack of highlighted bank statements across the table. He pointed to a specific line. He spoke with a voice that was cold, precise, and completely devoid of mercy. He stated for the record that he was handing the deponent a verified, subpoenaed bank statement from her father's primary corporate operating account, dated the exact day she just swore under oath that a massive cashier's check was issued. He politely asked her to read the ending balance for that day out loud for the court reporter. My sister frowned. She picked up the paper. Her smug, arrogant expression instantly vanished. She opened her mouth, but she didn't speak. Vance didn't wait. He looked at the court reporter and read it for the record himself. He announced that the account was overdrawn by $12,000. He stated that there was absolutely no record of an $800,000 withdrawal from any account her father has ever possessed in his entire life. Before they could even process that, Vance slid another, much thicker stack of documents across the table. These were the fake vendor invoices, the offshore routing numbers, and the wire transfer logs. Vance calmly explained that we had spent the last month meticulously reviewing her father's corporate ledgers. He revealed that we had found the offshore holding company. He stated, while looking right at my sister, that we had tracked hundreds of wire transfers from that illegal shell company directly into her personal checking account. Transfers totaling over $900,000 over a 5-year period. My father let out a sound that was half gasp, half absolute agonizing sob. He completely slumped down in his leather chair, crossed his arms on the table, and buried his face in them. Their lawyer quickly picked up the documents. The color drained completely from his face in a matter of seconds. He realized in real time that his clients had not only lied to him about the merits of the case, but they had also stupidly dragged him into the middle of a massive federal criminal conspiracy. My sister panicked. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Vance and yelled that he was lying. She screamed that he fabricated the papers and that he couldn't do this to them. Vance replied smoothly, reminding her that every single document on that table was subpoenaed directly from their own banking institutions. Then Vance went for the absolute kill shot. He brought out a sealed, official envelope. He opened it carefully. He stated that we had the original physical promissory note that they had surrendered analyzed by an independent forensic document examiner. He looked at my father and said the ink used for his signature and the typed text dated back perfectly to 7 years ago. Then he looked at my sister. He stated that the ink used for my supposed signature on the bottom of the page was a very specific, proprietary gel-based compound that was not even invented or manufactured until 2 years ago. He told her it was a physical, scientific impossibility for me to have signed that document when she claimed I did. Vance leaned forward. He told her she had committed perjury, attempted extortion, fraud, and filing a false instrument. The room was incredibly, suffocatingly dead silent, except for the frantic, rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's machine, taking down every single word. My sister slowly looked over at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and completely panicked. The crushing, unavoidable reality of the situation was finally penetrating her thick armor of lifelong entitlement. She leaned across the table and whispered to me. She told me I had to stop this. She pulled a family card, begging me to just give them some money so they could drop the lawsuit. She started crying, saying Dad was going to lose everything. I leaned forward. I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I kept my voice barely above a whisper, but I made sure it carried perfectly across the table for the record. I told her that she tried to steal my home. I laid out exactly what she did. She forged my name. She legally froze my hard-earned assets, and she tried to extort me for millions of dollars simply because she refused to live within reality. I told her I was not giving her a single dime. I turned my attention to their lawyer, who honestly looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. I laid out my terms clearly. I told him they were going to legally withdraw this bogus lawsuit with extreme prejudice that exact day. I told him he was going to immediately file the necessary paperwork with the county to lift the lease pendens on my property. I promised them that if they did that without a single word of protest, I would generously agree to drop my multi-million-dollar civil countersuit for malicious prosecution. My sister let out a massive, dramatic sigh of relief. She actually wiped a tear away and smiled. She looked at me and said she knew I wouldn't ruin them because we were family. She quickly told her lawyer to withdraw it. I held my hand up and interrupted her. I tapped the massive stack of embezzlement evidence sitting between us. I told her I wasn't finished. I explained that while I was dropping the civil countersuit, my attorney had already prepared a secure courier package containing every single audited document detailing her father's massive corporate fraud. I looked right at my father and told him that the second we walked out of this room, that package was being messengered directly to his silent business partner. I paused, letting the silence hang, before adding that a duplicate package was currently sitting in the outgoing mail bin, addressed directly to the regional field office of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. My sister completely stopped breathing. My father actually started weeping openly, the pathetic sound echoing loudly off the sterile conference room walls. My sister stood up, knocking her chair back. She screamed that I couldn't do that. She yelled that he would go to jail, that she would have to pay back all the money, and accused me of destroying our family. I stood up, calmly buttoned my custom suit jacket, and looked down at her. I told her I didn't steal the money. I just turned on the lights. Vance and I packed our briefcases and walked out of the room, leaving them completely alone in the absolute ruins of their own making. The fallout was incredibly swift, completely public, and absolutely devastating for them. Their terrified lawyer filed the official withdrawal the very next morning. The lease pendens was formally removed from my title 2 days later. The HOA instantly approved my renovation permits, and my contractor immediately began the heavy work on my penthouse. My father's silent business partner received the package. He didn't hesitate. He immediately changed the locks, locked my father out of the company offices, froze every single corporate operating account, and hired his own team of vicious lawyers. A week later, federal agents executed a raid on my father's home. They carried out boxes of computers and files. He was formally indicted by a grand jury on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and severe tax evasion. Because he had stolen so much money over such a long period, the government showed no mercy. They seized absolutely everything. They seized the house. They seized his remaining decimated retirement accounts. And they aggressively went after any assets purchased with the stolen funds. Federal marshals showed up and repossessed my sister's luxury SUV right out of her parking garage. The government froze all of her personal bank accounts. She was quickly forced to vacate her gorgeous luxury loft because she obviously couldn't pay the exorbitant rent without my father's stolen subsidies flowing in. Because she was a direct recipient of the embezzled funds, she spent months absolutely terrified that she would be indicted as a criminal co-conspirator. She only managed to avoid a stint in federal prison by eagerly cooperating with the prosecution against our father and agreeing to a staggering, life-ruining financial restitution plan. The IRS is essentially garnishing any future wages she might ever earn for the rest of her life. My mother filed for divorce from my father shortly after the federal indictment hit the news, desperately claiming to everyone who would listen that she had absolutely no idea about the fraud. She moved into a spare bedroom at my aunt's house. My aunt only allowed her to stay under the strict, non-negotiable condition that my mother got a full-time job and contributed heavily to the household bills. My father eventually gave up fighting and pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He is currently serving a 72-month sentence in a federal minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. My sister, the ultimate golden child, the high-end influencer who absolutely needed a penthouse for her personal brand, now works as a tired shift manager at a mid-level retail clothing store in a depressing suburban mall. She lives in a cramped, dark basement apartment with 2 messy roommates. Her meager wages are aggressively garnished by the federal government every single week. She actually tried to reach out to me once about 3 months ago. She sent a long, rambling, unhinged email from a new account, aggressively blaming me for ruining her life, refusing to take any accountability, and asking me for a $50,000 loan to get back on her feet. I read the first 2 lines and deleted it without replying. I officially moved into my penthouse 6 months ago. The renovations are completely finished and look incredible. I have a custom, temperature-controlled server room, beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows, and a massive private balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Every single morning, I stand out on that balcony, drink my coffee, and watch the entire city wake up. There's a profound, incredibly quiet peace in knowing that you built your foundation on solid rock, while the people who constantly look down on you built their massive castles on sand. They spent their entire lives trying to maintain a ridiculous illusion of superiority, and when the tide finally came in, it washed them entirely away. You simply cannot cheat your way out of reality forever. Eventually, the universe always balances the books. If you loved seeing the golden child's entitlement get permanently downgraded from a luxury suite to the clearance rack, hit subscribe. My next story guarantees even more high-interest karma with 0 fraudulent signatures.